We are just a couple of days removed from the Kansas City Chiefs delivering a certified whipping of the team that had been pretty roundly considered the best team in the NFL so far through this season, and perhaps infamously at this point, following that victory, the Kansas City Chiefs dropped in a couple of different power rankings polls, which really means nothing. It's just interesting to talk about. But I have here 9 points on the defense that I thought were worth talking about following the victory versus the Lions. And the number one thing is this. The commentary about this game is that the Kansas City Chiefs picked on a beaten-up Lions secondary to the point that Brian Branch, lost in his fifis, busted Juju Smith-Schuster in his face. But the Lions entered that game as the number one scoring offense in the NFL, averaging over 35 points per contest, and they looked absolutely pedestrian with a 17-point output. Now, the Lions had technically two injuries on the offense, with their left tackle and their backup left tackle going down. So what's the excuse for the offense? You want to say that the Chiefs beat up on that injured secondary, and that's true. That iteration of Patrick Mahomes and this Chiefs offense would have beaten up on a lot of secondaries. But the Lions offense did not have that excuse. The Lions offense came out and looked run-of-the-mill, scoring 17 points total. Now, if you want to say that the Kansas City Chiefs beat up on the Lions secondary, you can say that. But to what extent? Because the Kansas City Chiefs did not need the 1 point that Harrison Butker missed that would have made it 31. They did not need the probable field goal that would have resulted when the Kansas City Chiefs decided to go for it on 4th and 3 at the 20-ish yard line and missed. They did not take that field goal attempt. They went for it on 4th down and they did not convert. That could have been 34 points, but the Chiefs wouldn't have needed the 34 points just as much as they wouldn't have needed the 31 points, just as much as they didn't need the 30 points that they actually scored. The Chiefs would have only needed 18. So say what you want about the Lions secondary, a lot of those guys played. Say what you want about the fact that the Lions were so injured, when you wouldn't make those same excuses for the Kansas City Chiefs offense last season, expecting MVP Patrick Mahomes, despite the fact that yours truly played 9 reps of wide receiver for the Kansas City Chiefs and 6 reps of offensive tackle. It didn't matter that the Chiefs offense was busted up the entire year. But now, all of a sudden, the Ravens had some injuries and the Lions had some injuries. It's just interesting the way that this works out. And again, we are seeing this narrative rise that the Kansas City Chiefs are favored by the referees, as if the NFL writ large wants a team from Kansas City, Missouri in flyover country to dominate the NFL for the greater part of a decade and still going. If that's what the NFL wants, then the NFL is run by absolute morons, because the teams that the NFL has in New York, the teams that the NFL has in Texas, which would be the premier, preeminent teams if you were looking at trying to script a league, are terrible. Is the Kansas City Chiefs, the lowly Kansas City Chiefs, that are the dominant team in football. No one wants that. No one wants that. Just us here in Kansas City, and you don't have to be in Kansas City to be a Chiefs fan, so I guess I shouldn't say it that way, but no one wants the Kansas City Chiefs to be dominating the NFL. And they are. The number 2 thing we're talking about here, the pass rush was non-existent. I think Jared Goff was only sacked once. there was a roaming soft spot in the passing game, and there is a roaming soft spot in the passing game all season. Sometimes it's in the middle of the field, sometimes it's on the perimeter, sometimes it is in the corner post range of the defense. It just seems there is always one part on the field that is pretty much always open for an opposing offense. Nick Bolton seems to be in recovery mode from the snap of the ball in pass coverage plays. The rookies are getting confoundingly few snaps, but guys, it seems that this is just what a good defense looks like in 2025. There are all sorts of things that make it hard to watch on a quarter-by-quarter basis every Sunday, but it seems that, and look, for me too. And on Twitter, everyone else is saying how terrible the defense is. And yet, the number one scoring offense in the NFL comes to town, gets 17 points, and it still doesn't feel like a dominant performance. It is a weird thing with this defense. And like I said all of last year, like I said all of 2023, I think... So here's... If you want like the nuts and bolts of what I think is going on here for us, sort of... if I can throw in a vocabulary word, liminally as a Chiefs fan. The last time before the Patrick Mahomes, Andy Reid era that the Chiefs were really good was 2002, 2003. What was 2002, 2003? It was the era of the running back. In the post-Vermeil, post-Priest Holmes, post-Trent Green world, the Chiefs were terrible. But also, that was an era in the NFL of great upheaval. After that time, between that time, the fall of the aughts Kansas City Chiefs and the rise of the Andy Reid era, the NFL running back position became null and void. Priest Holmes, LaDainian Tomlinson, they were the kings of the NFL. The next time the Chiefs were good, the running back position meant nothing. And with that, defenses changed too. Well, between the aught era Chiefs, the Priest Holmes era Chiefs, and the Andy Reid era Chiefs, everything in the NFL changed. And the Chiefs weren't good at any of it. So by the time the Chiefs started getting good again, we, in the back of our minds, had as a, what is a good defense? Well, it was those Derek Thomas-led Kansas City Chiefs teams. We had nothing else to compare it to. There was no other good defense in our history. Well, in our sort of memory, I guess I should say. For a good Chiefs team having a good defense, it was the Marty Schottenheimer era. That's not what good defenses look like anymore. So, short story long, that's what I think is going on and why it feels like the defense isn't very good, because we just don't really know what a good defense looks like in the NFL these days. The defensive line. So I mentioned the defensive line in that previous point, and I think that's fair. The Chiefs' defensive line has been probably the bane of Steve Spagnuolo's existence the first 6 weeks of the season. George Karlaftis had a pretty bad game. Played 48 snaps, ended up with a 56.6 defense grade, a 72.0 tackling grade. That is decent there. And then you had a 68.2 pass rush grade and a 57.9 run defense grade. But he only had one tackle, right? No sacks, no hits on the quarterback, one hurry. So you're looking at a player that performed decent but didn't make an impact. Then you have Chris Jones, who, in the back of my mind, when I think about that game, was everywhere. Ended up with 2 hits, 2 hurries, a 91.3 pass rush grade, a 26.3 tackling grade. Now, again, these grades aren't everything. You can't base all of it, all of your evaluation here. But they do mean something. And I think that if any of them mean something, the tackling grade is probably the one that does, because it's pretty cut and dry. And this is a pass rush day for Chris Jones, but he didn't do anything versus the run. A 47.6 run defense grade and a 26.3 tackling grade. That translates to a defensive tackle who played 44 snaps, probably being a liability half the time. And if you go back and you watch the game, there are plenty of times where you can see Chris Jones assess, oh, well, this is a running play. Never mind. And that is a harken back to a former Chris Jones that the Kansas City Chiefs kind of don't need right now. Charles Omenihu had his best week overall, and he had good grades to go with it. He had a 72.5 defensive grade, a 71.5 run defense grade, a 70.6 tackling grade, and a 63.6 pass rush grade, despite being the one guy who got a sack. He got a batted ball and a tackle. So Omenihu is, I think, rounding out. I think that he's had a couple of better performances in a row now. He was kind of invisible earlier in the season, and we will have to see if he is. So Omenihu has never had a full season as a Kansas City Chief yet. So maybe it just takes him a little while to get going. Hopefully that is the case, and hopefully he returns to the guy that we have seen in flashes during this time. Now, he played 30 reps, which is essentially 2/3 of the reps that the defense was out there. So, was in effect the second defensive end for this game. Talking of the second defensive tackle in effect for this game was Derek Nottie, who was naughty good. Naughty any good. Derek not any good. Ended up with 25 snaps, a 29.8 defensive grade, a 30.7 run defense grade, a 67.3 pass rush grade, and a 55.4 pass rush grade, or a 67.3 tackling grade. I think I said pass rush there. Ended up with only 1 assisted tackle on the game. Now, Derek Nottie was supposed to be the run stuffer, so disappointing there. But again, I think that Derek Nottie's role in this defense is a little bit confusing if you are trying to grade it, because really he doesn't have to make the tackle to be effective, especially with the linebackers that are backing him up. And I don't think that he is necessarily being counted on to be the guy making the tackle. The one thing that is confounding to me here, and I'll get to this with the rookie report video this week, the defensive line struggled. It seemed that the defensive line struggled getting any pressure. It seemed that the defensive line struggled making stops in the running game. Again, it was largely the linebackers who made the stops. Omar Norman-Lott played only 11 snaps. Ashton Gillotte played only 17 snaps. Those guys might not be the most productive from a standard stat sheet perspective, but they do seem to have the most juice. And the few times that I saw Ashton Gillotte out there, he was assignment sound, but the few times that I noticed him, the Lions were running completely away from him. So unfortunately, I don't have a great read on it, but Those guys are the guys that have been giving juice to the defensive line when they've needed it, and they barely played in this game. Now, it was a big game. It was a game the Chiefs needed. It was a game against a team that was supposed to be the number one team in the NFL by most metrics, or by most observers, I guess I should say. So maybe it's not particularly surprising that the rookie class overall didn't have a big impact. Well, there was one rookie that didn't have an impact at all that was a pretty big surprise, but none of the rookies really did anything in this game. So might just have been that the Chiefs decided, well, if we're going to go with the professionals here. Chenal had a confusing game. Chenal, to the best of my observational skills, seemed to be everywhere during this game. Seemed to be one of the guys that was really making the defense go. Seemed to be one of the guys that was really out there on the field changing what it was that the Lions were able to do. Got terrible scores. Now, 39 snaps, which might be the most snaps I'll have to look into it, might be the most snaps Chenal has ever played. Had a 52.4 defense grade, a 58.6 run defense grade, a 41.3 tackling grade, a 49.3 pass rush grade, and a 56.0 coverage grade. This is despite, now the coverage grade, I believe. But all of this is despite looking like the best defensive player on the field for the most part probably the second. Trent McDuffie looked really good. That tackling grade, I don't understand, because I believe it was Jahmyr Gibbs had a play where he was starting to get away. It looked like it could have been broken for a pretty good gain. And Chenal grabbed him by the undershirt and stopped him. So was it a clean, textbook, wrap-up, face mask between the numbers tackle? No. But it was a tackle that most guys in the NFL don't make, and Chenal did. So it's kind of unfortunate, in my opinion, that Chenal has had so little playing time to this point in his career, because I think that Chenal can be one of these guys that is a game-changing defensive player. And it's also, listen, I love Hit Stick Nick. I love Nick Bolton. It's a little upsetting that, so Nick Bolton is a physically more restricted Chenal, right? I think everybody kind of understands what I'm saying with that. The problem is, so you think, oh, Nick Bolton, great linebacker. Chenal, great linebacker, and he's bigger, he's faster, he's stronger. Throw them both on the field at the same time, we've got two great linebackers. The problem is they're both terrible in coverage. So you can kind of only afford to really have one of them on the field at a time, and Nick Bolton was just re-signed to a long-term deal. So what does this say for Chenal's prospects long-term with the Kansas City Chiefs? I'm not sure. The fifth thing I want to talk about here isn't really maybe the greatest talking point, but it's one of my favorite moments in the game. Trent McDuffie, okay, you remember the trick play that got called back. Jared Goff has to stop, has to set his feet, etc. before the snap of the ball. What happens on that play is that Jared Goff motions out from the quarterback position out to a wide receiver position. The reason that's so dangerous is no one goes with him, so no one's accounting for him, and it becomes two offensive players versus one defensive player, a cornerback versus a wide receiver, and a quarterback. As long as the wide receiver can get in the way of the cornerback, oh, it's money every day. The problem is it almost got stopped. Trent McDuffie almost stopped that play. Look at the line of scrimmage. The blue line here is the line of scrimmage. So what you have is you have Trent McDuffie, who is a good foot behind the line of scrimmage, having absolutely annihilated the wide receiver here, and is giving Jared Goff the business. That is one angle of it. The other one is perhaps even more impressive when you consider that the line of scrimmage is like right here, meaning that Trent McDuffie, so here's the line of scrimmage, Trent McDuffie started over here. And here he is nearly destroying this play, almost making Jared Goff fumble the football, and that would have been incredible. So, and there's another time in this game we'll get to in a moment where Trent McDuffie almost saved the day like this. So the sixth thing to say is just a comment. Don't try to hurdle Jaylen Watson. Jaylen Watson is 6'2". You're going to put your NFL career at risk. The seventh thing to talk about here is statistical. This defense is not particularly compelling from a statistical standpoint. They are 14th in total yards given up with 1,867 yards yielded this season. They are 10th in passing, which is pretty good, but not elite. There's only 32 teams, right? So you're only the top 33rd percentile, giving up 1,152 yards to this point in the season. As good as they are versus the pass, they're just as bad against the run. They struggle versus the run, having yielded 715 yards to this point in the season, which is good for 20th. And they are 12th in points surrendered, having given up 124 points so far. This is going to improve as the season goes on. The Chiefs had a very bad week 1, and if they had a little bit of a better week 1 showing, I think that this would have been something that is considerably better right now. Now, obviously, how much statistically considerably better could it be at this point when it was not all that statistically wild a football game for the Chargers? But I think that it also caused them to lose a little bit of their personality for a couple weeks, and I think that they got off track with what it was they were trying to really do, despite the fact that they really put the clamps down on the Eagles. I think that you saw a team that was a little bit shaken, a team that was not quite as confident in their play calling. Maybe not as aggressive even as they could, as aggressive as they were in that game. Had they known that they were going to shape up in this fashion, perhaps they would have gone a little bit more aggressive. So here is something interesting to talk about. This is the stat sheet overall from that game. Jared Goff, 23 of 29, 203 yards, 2 touchdowns. Completed 23 passes, threw for 203 yards, threw 2 touchdowns. Nothing compelling there. Gibbs, 17 for 65, a 3.8 yard average. David Montgomery only ran the ball 4 times for 24 yards. That's a good average, but it doesn't really mean much when you're only touching the ball 4 times. Then we have receiving. No one had 100 yards. No one had 70 yards. Jamison Williams with 6 receptions for 66 yards. Sam Laporta with 5 for 55. And Amon-Ra St. Brown with 9 for 45. Then you had David Montgomery, 2 for 37. The next statistical player there is Jared Goff. Now they had I think it was Gibbs had 1 reception, 0 yards, which technically ranks below Jared Goff. But you had really 4 players, for all intents and purposes, catch the ball. Nothing stands out here. Nothing stands out here. Now, I believe that Jared Goff had a pretty good rating. I think that a couple of their offensive players graded out pretty well, which doesn't mean anything if you're not putting up the actual numbers. So it's a very interesting. It might be that is why we're seeing part of this phenomenon of the Chiefs' defense is irritating to watch, but they're yielding 17 points to the best offense in football, is that they are not giving up yards, really. They're not giving up touchdowns, really. But they're giving up efficiency. So it might feel worse than it is. Then the last point I want to make here is maybe a low point. Something was wrong with the secondary. Something is going on with the secondary. There was a lot of this here. See that hand waving? He's pointing, yelling at Noel Williams. Then there was this play that, just like you, I'm sure I almost had a heart attack watching this before the snap. You had Jameson Williams up here, all alone on an island. Then you have 3 defensive players here. You have a safety pulling the Tyrann Mathieu over here. You even have Jalen Watson on the other side of the field saying, hey, that doesn't look good. I don't think that's supposed to be like that. Now, luckily, they did complete this pass, and Trent McDuffie went ahead and tackled Jameson Williams right around there. So it was not a disaster. It was not the disaster that it could have been, but there were a couple of times in this game where that happened. Again, you see all of this hand waving here at Noel Williams, and then there was another snap where Noel Williams, it looked as if Noel Williams were misaligned, but knew his assignment. He ended up crashing down on the wide receiver by the snap of the ball, despite lining up 15 yards deep. And he ended up giving up like a 6-yard slant route, right? Something like that. But it looked as if there were just confusion prior to the snap. Now, that is a bit of a bad thing right now, right? A negative for this game. That said, I do not imagine this being a problem going forward. If you want to say anything about Steve Spagnuolo's defenses, poorly coached is not usually one of those things. Assignment unsound is not usually one of those things. So I would imagine that these things are going to get figured out by the time the postseason gets here. I do fully expect the Kansas City Chiefs to be in the postseason, and that is one of those ways that this team will constantly sort of get better as the season goes on. That is all I have for this video. If you like or appreciate what it is that I do here, hitting the like button really does help me out, as it tells YouTube to share this video with other Kansas City Chiefs fans. If you find yourself here by chance but not design, the Chiefs are the only thing I talk about on this channel, dropping multiple videos every single week. And as always, I hope to have you back for the next one.